You're scrolling your phone at 7:14 a.m., coffee going cold on the table, and two headlines slide past your thumb within 30 seconds of each other. The first one says, NVIDIA now holds a $30 billion stake in Intel, the strongest chip company on Earth, buying into its weakest major rival. The second one says, China just launched its third national chip fund, $47 billion, the largest one yet. You pause on the second headline because the number feels fake. The way numbers do when they're too round and too big at the same time. But it's real, and you know it's real, and that's the part that sits wrong with you all morning. Here's the question that won't leave you alone. Why would NVIDIA, the company that buried Intel in the AI era, turn around and rescue it? And why would a government pour billions into an industry that private investors already walked away from? The news will tell you these are two different stories. One is a free market business deal. The other is state-driven industrial policy. But you've been reading long enough to notice something. The ledgers look suspiciously identical. You see, both superpowers love to explain why their system is better. Washington talks about free markets, competition, letting winners win. Beijing talks about concentrated effort, national strategy, doing what markets can't. Yet when you actually look at the money, where it comes from, where it goes, who signs the checks, the distinction gets blurry. Both governments are using taxpayer funds to prop up chip companies that the market wouldn't save on its own. Both are picking national champions. Both are calling it something nobler than what it is. The contradiction is uncomfortable because it cuts both ways. America criticizes China for state capitalism while quietly buying 10% of Intel and pressuring TSMC to triple its U.S. investment. China criticizes America for hypocrisy while burning through its own massive subsidies that produced bankruptcies and abandoned factories. Neither side wants to admit that the other side's playbook looks a lot like their own. But the evidence is sitting right there in your news feed. Two headlines stacked on top of each other like a confession. So this is the mystery we're going to untangle. Not whether one system is better than the other. That's a dead end. But why both systems, claiming to be opposites, keep reaching for the same tool, your money, aimed at companies the market already gave up on. And in the end, the bill always lands on the same doorstep, yours. Let's start with the side that talks the loudest about free markets. Because if you want a masterclass in irony, there is no better case study than Intel. Intel was for 4 decades the beating heart of American computing. The Intel Inside sticker was not just marketing. It was a statement of fact about who powered the modern world. And then the ground shifted. The company that taught the world how to make chips forgot how to learn. In 2024, Intel posted a net loss of $18.8 billion. That was its first annual loss since 1986, a year when the top movie was Top Gun and the top computer was a beige box that beeped at you. The fall was not slow. In August 2024, Intel's stock dropped 26% in a single day, vaporizing $26 billion in market value before lunch. By the time the dust settled, the company had shed over 35,000 jobs across 2 brutal rounds of layoffs, and its market cap had collapsed from over $200 billion to below $100 billion. This was not a stumble. This was a fall down a flight of stairs with a tray of glassware. So what did the United States government do? It did what any self-respecting champion of laissez-faire capitalism would do. It called an ambulance. The CHIPS Act, passed in 2022, set aside $52.7 billion to revive domestic semiconductor manufacturing. Intel was the designated patient. The company received a $7.86 billion direct grant, plus an $11 billion loan. But here is where the story gets genuinely strange. On August 22, 2025, the government converted $8.9 billion of that support, an unpaid grant and a military secure enclave payment, into a 9.9% equity stake in Intel. The United States government became Intel's largest institutional shareholder. Not a bank. Not a hedge fund. The federal government. And in a move that would make a bankruptcy lawyer blush, the original clawback and profit-sharing clauses were quietly removed. If Intel fails, the taxpayer eats the loss. If Intel soars, the taxpayer does not get a proportional cut. This is not a rescue. It is a one-way door. The analogy here is unavoidable. Imagine the strongest kid in class being told to tutor the weakest kid, not out of kindness, but because the teacher is terrified the weak kid will burn down the chemistry lab. And the whole class, that is you, the taxpayer, is forced to pay for the tutoring sessions. Or, if you prefer a darker image, the gravedigger has been retrained as a paramedic, but he still charges by the hour. Then came NVIDIA. On September 18, 2025, NVIDIA, the company that actually won the AI race, invested $5 billion in Intel at $23.28 per share, alongside a deal to co-develop AI chips. It was less a partnership and more a life raft thrown from a yacht. By August 2026, that stake was worth $30 billion, a six-fold return in under a year. NVIDIA did not rescue Intel out of charity. It rescued Intel because a collapsed Intel would leave NVIDIA dangerously dependent on foreign fabs. But the optics are brutal. The market leader made a fortune bailing out the laggard, while the taxpayer held a 9.9% stake with no upside protection. And the pressure did not stop at Intel. The White House leaned on TSMC, the Taiwanese giant that actually knows how to make cutting-edge chips, to expand its U.S. investment from $65 billion to $165 billion to $265 billion. The message was clear. We will pay you to build here because we cannot build it ourselves. The Washington Post, not exactly a socialist rag, admitted this breaks decades of U.S. economic precedent and mirrors state ownership in Europe, Taiwan. When the Post says that, you know the free market mask has slipped. Trump, never one to miss a talking point, boasted that taxpayers made 30 billion on Intel. That is a fun soundbite, but it is also deeply misleading. The $30 billion gain belongs to NVIDIA, not to you. Your pension fund, your 401k, your index funds, they now hold a piece of a company that the government owns a chunk of, with no mechanism to recover your money if things go south. You did not choose this trade. You did not get a vote. But your retirement is now locked in a casino where the house is the federal government, and the dealer is a chip company that forgot how to count cards. So what this means for you is simple. The next time you hear a politician lecture about the sanctity of free markets, remember Intel? Remember the 9.9% stake. Remember the removed clawbacks. Because in the new American industrial policy, the market is free, free to fail, free to beg, and free to send the bill to your 401k. So if the side that worships free markets is running a state-funded ER, what's the side that worships the state doing? You might assume it's running a tight ship, central planning, clear directives, every yuan accounted for. And you would be wrong, but in a way that's almost impressive, because China's approach to semiconductors isn't a plan, it's a ledger. A very large, very public, and increasingly red ledger. Let's start with the numbers. Because China loves numbers, and these ones matter. The National Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund, everyone calls it the Big Fund, has been the central pillar of China's chip ambitions since 2014. Phase 1, 13.8 billion yuan. Phase 2, launched in 2019, 204.1 billion yuan. Phase 3, announced in 2024, 34.4 billion yuan. That's 686.85 billion yuan total. Roughly $96 billion. Here's the telling detail. Phase 3 alone is bigger than Phases 1 and 2 combined. 6 state-owned banks, including Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, the world's largest, poured 127.5 billion yuan into that third round, and that's just the direct funding. Local governments leveraged another 500 billion yuan or more in matching funds. Because every province wanted its own semiconductor park, its own wafer fab, its own slice of the future. Add up all the subsidies, tax breaks, cheap land, and state-backed loans over the past decade, and you get roughly $142 billion. That's 3.6 times the entire U.S. CHIPS Act. Let that sit for a moment. The country that lectures the world about fiscal discipline has outspent the free market evangelists by nearly 4-to-1 on a single industry. But spending isn't the problem. The problem is what the spending bought. Take Tsinghua Unigroup, the crown jewel of China's chip acquisition strategy. Between 2013 and 2015, this state-backed conglomerate went on a shopping spree that would make a private equity fund blush. It bought Spreadrum for $1.78 billion, RDA Microelectronics for $910 million, and attempted a $23 billion hostile takeover of Micron, which predictably got rejected by U.S. regulators. Reuters calculated that Tsinghua Unigroup spent $904 billion on mergers and acquisitions in just 2 years. The idea was simple. Buy the technology you can't develop, then integrate it into a national champion. But integration never happened. In 2020, the company defaulted on a bond. Its credit rating went from AAA to C in 5 months. By 2021, it had $2 billion in overdue debt and was in bankruptcy restructuring. The state consortium that rescued it in 2022 injected another 60 billion yuan, about $4 billion, just to keep the lights on. And in 2025, founder Zhao Weiguo was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve for corruption. The national champion ended up as a cautionary tale about what happens when you treat industrial policy like a leveraged buyout. But Tsinghua Unigroup was just the most visible failure. There were boondoggles everywhere. Wuhan Hongxin claimed it was building a 128 billion yuan memory chip fab, but the lithography machine, the most critical piece of equipment, was mortgaged on arrival because the company couldn't pay for it. The project collapsed. Wuhan Semiconductor announced a 45 billion yuan investment and ended up auctioned off for 1.667 billion yuan. That's a 96% loss. You could have bought lottery tickets and done better. And then there's the corruption. In 2022, 6 big fund executives were investigated in a single 2-month stretch, including General Manager Ding Wenwu. The national team's own leadership was allegedly skimming from the very fund meant to secure China's technological future. Imagine if the people running the CHIPS Act office got arrested for embezzlement. That's the scale of what happened. So what did all this money actually buy? SMIC, China's best chip maker, posted 2024 revenue of $8 billion. TSMC posted $90 billion. That's an 11-fold gap. On net profit, the gap is 70-fold. And here's the kicker. From 2018 to 2019, SMIC would have posted core losses without government subsidies. Its most advanced node is stuck at 7 nanometers because it can't buy EUV lithography machines. The machines only one Dutch company makes, and the US won't let them be sold to China. So you have a situation where the state buys the flour, the mill, and the bakery, but the bread still burns. Think of it as pouring water into a leaky bucket while it drains. You can pour faster, you can build a bigger bucket. You can even hire more people to pour. But if the holes are in the bottom, the corruption, the mismanagement, the technological bottlenecks, the water ends up on the floor either way. China's industrial policy isn't a failure of ambition. It's a failure of execution. Layered on top of a failure of incentives, wrapped in a failure of accountability. So what this means for you is this. When China's state-owned banks contribute 127.5 billion yuan to a chip fund, that's not free money. It's your money, or rather, the Chinese people's money extracted from state-owned enterprise profits, from bank deposits, from the economy itself. And when those investments go bad, the losses don't vanish. They get absorbed by the state, which means they get absorbed by taxpayers, by savers, by anyone who depends on the Chinese financial system. The same is true on the American side, just through a different mechanism. 2 superpowers, 2 very different ideologies, and the same fundamental outcome. The public pays, the insiders play, and the chips, well, the chips keep burning. So now you have 2 ledgers. Let's put them side by side, because the symmetry is almost too neat to be accidental. On the left, your American ledger, $39 billion in CHIPS Act grants, an $89 billion government equity stake in Intel, another $5 billion from NVIDIA's rescue package. On the right, your Chinese ledger, 686.85 billion yuan from the big fund, plus local government matching funds that push the total far higher. Tsinghua Unigroup collapsed under its own debt. Hongxin Semiconductor never produced a single wafer. SMIC remains roughly 11 years behind TSMC in process technology. And here's the uncomfortable part, both ledgers are still bleeding. You might think these are 2 different stories with 2 different endings. They are not. They are the same story, translated into 2 different dialects of denial. The fuel is identical. Taxpayer money. In America, that means the federal budget, your pension funds, your 401k diluted every time the government prints rescue packages or takes equity stakes that could crowd out private returns. In China, it means state banks, profits siphoned from state-owned enterprises, and the tobacco monopoly, which is to say the entire population, whether they smoke or not, whether they own Intel shares or not, whether they even know what a semiconductor is. The burn rate doesn't care about your ideology. The irony compounds when you read what each side says about the other. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece in August 2025 with a headline that should have stung. America's capitalism is starting to look like China's. The Washington Post, more delicately, admitted that the Intel stake mirrors state ownership in Europe, Taiwan. The Cato Institute, not exactly a hotbed of communist sympathy, called it state corporatism. That phrase should ring a bell because it's the exact phrase Western analysts used for years to attack China's industrial policy. You don't get to borrow your enemy's vocabulary by accident. But the deepest irony is not that both sides are doing the same thing. The deepest irony is that both sides deny doing what the other accuses them of. China denies being state capitalist while running the largest industrial policy apparatus in human history, a system where the state picks winners, funnels capital, and absorbs losses. America denies abandoning free markets while buying 10% of a chip company and calling it a national security imperative. You have two governments, each holding a mirror up to the other, and each insisting the reflection is a distortion. Think of it this way. Two doctors from rival medical schools, each convinced the other's methods are quackery. They write the same prescription from the same pad and send the same bill to the same patients. The patients are you. American taxpayers, Chinese citizens, everyone who pays taxes or buys products or holds a retirement account. The medicine is industrial policy. The side effects include moral hazard, capital misallocation, and a creeping sense that the market left to itself would have made different choices. But the doctors keep writing prescriptions, because stopping would mean admitting the diagnosis was wrong. So what this means for you is this. When you hear chip sovereignty or national champion, ask who pays. Not who benefits. That's the easy question, and the answer is always the same. A handful of executives, a few well-connected funds, and a narrative about strategic independence. Ask who pays, because in both systems the answer is the same too. You do. Through your taxes, your retirement account, your government's borrowing, your economy's misallocated capital. The two superpowers are burning your money on chips, and they're doing it with the same matches, just struck on different sides of the box. Here's the thing about the space race nobody prints on the commemorative posters. Apollo cost American taxpayers $388 billion in today's dollars across 13 years. The Soviet program quietly consumed 1 to 2% of their entire GNP for decades. And the real lesson isn't that the Soviets lost. It's that the winner nearly burned itself out crossing the finish line. Now look at chips. China has committed $122 billion. Washington has put $52 billion on the table and is already talking about more. Neither side has a moon. Neither side has a moment where the flag goes up and the spending stops. They are running the space race without a destination. Just two superpowers pouring kerosene into engines pointed at each other. You might think this is a China disease or an America disease. It's not. Japan tried the national champion model with JS Foundry, a state-backed semiconductor darling meant to lead the country back to glory. It went bankrupt in 2.5 years, buried under 16.1 billion yen of debt. The model fails in third countries too. It fails everywhere, because the math doesn't care about the flag on the letterhead. So here is your weapon, because you will hear these words again: chip sovereignty, national champion, industrial policy. They sound grand. They are designed to. When you hear them, ask 3 questions. Who pays? Taxpayers. Who benefits? The connected, the incumbent, the well-lobbied, not the ordinary person buying a laptop or paying a power bill. Who foots the bill when the champion stumbles? Still taxpayers. Always taxpayers. 2 systems, 2 slogans, 1 ledger. And the invoice is always addressed to you. If this little ramble saved you a few brain cells, consider subscribing. The next episode is cheaper than a semiconductor fab and slightly less likely to go bankrupt.